Okay, and I apologise at my end if there's a bit of background noise. There's some construction in my neighbourhood.
Of course there is. Yeah, it's always the way. We had that with Tim had his next door neighbour doing some renovations during one of our Zooms not long ago, and that was quite amusing. Always the way.
Had a jackhammer in his bathroom. You know, I live in a complex, in a strata complex, so and the walls are paper thin.
Yeah,
so, entertaining.
Well, I hope there's no jackhammer.
So, Julia, I thought we might get started with, so you're the Shadow Minister for Better Regulation?
Well, Consumer Protection.
Consumer Protection, okay. Yeah, I thought that the title was different to that. Can we just start by asking you, why politics? What motivated you to get into such a thankless job?
Okay, well, from when I was a little kid, I really looked up to Bob Hawke. I really admired his efforts to save the Franklin Dam. This was when I was a very, very little kid. Yep. And I've always been interested in politics, interested in the capacities governments have to help people, and also the responsibility they have, given they take all our taxes and supposedly
add value. Well. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay, fantastic. So the latest recession is caused from a health issue rather than financial. Is that going to change the strategy on how we get out of the financial sort of situation that we're in, or recession that we're in?
Well, from my perspective, I think it's going to be very different, because usually construction is the first place to show any downturn. People start noticing nervousness about orders. People who've got a DA approved suddenly decide to sit on it for a little while, and yet because this is being led by the health orders and the protections, it's actually affected completely different sectors of the economy. And instead of being, traditionally male-dominated areas, and traditionally areas that governments are it's very easy for governments to intervene and start with construction projects, because governments are always doing construction projects. It's a lot more challenging, given that they're mainly female-dominated areas of work. In most households, the female family members don't earn as much as their male counterparts, so they won't necessarily be able to access any sort of additional income support. And some of the pain that people be feeling is going to be more hidden than usual, but it'll be just as real. But also, you can't get everybody's job back in cafes unless you reopen cafes, and that is the really big challenge. Those restrictions are there for a good reason, but they're having a very disproportionate impact on hospitality and tourism in particular, but a whole lot of areas of the economy, and those areas are going to struggle for a long time. Even with more and more people working from home, the amount of business that's generated in ancillary services in CBDs is going to be affected for a long time. People aren't going to be popping downstairs to buy a coffee if they didn't come into work in the first place. So
yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, Tim and I were just talking about that, about our own offices, and Tim was saying, I don't really know that we need as much space anymore. Like, we've just got to give people a lot more flexibility, and I'm doing the same thing. So you're absolutely right. The world is going to be massively different coming out of this.
Yeah, that's and you make a really good point about that, because I can see the regional areas benefiting out of all of this, because I think what's happened, and I'm a classic example, because I detest technology. I have a real, anytime somebody says to me, it's intuitive, or what's the other favourite one? I can't think of it now.
It's user-friendly.
User-friendly. All I want to do is slap them, because it's not user-friendly to me. But I've been forced into into using the technology, and I'm still not good, but I've gained a lot of confidence in things like this. So the question I'm asking myself is, you know, all the flexibility now that I can do. So people would like to go and live somewhere up the coast, for example, up Terrigal and beyond. You know, that would be possibly a better place to live than in a townhouse or small accommodation which is close to work, close to the city. And now I think people are going to be reassessing their accommodation needs. Now, if you're living, you know, 2 hours away, and to travel into work and travel home, you know, in the Blue Mountains, another classic example. Now, I wouldn't be interested in doing that travel every day. I know some people do, but I couldn't do it. But I could do it once a week. You know, I could do it once a week. I'd be fine with that. And then work from home. So I like you point out, you know, there's not going to be the people in the city that are going to be buying their lunch or going down for that coffee, et cetera, et cetera. So it is going to disrupt our economy in the city, undoubtedly.
Yeah, and I think it's had a huge impact on the stigma that used to be around working from home. People used to sort of do it in the inverted commas, working from home. And think that it was, well, sometimes for, you know, awful reasons, like there's a sick kid at home, but also to supervise renovations or whatever else. But, you know, now that we've all been doing it, people realise that you can actually get your work done from home, and, you know, meetings like this, or meetings using any sort of digital platform rather than everybody getting stuck in traffic trying to get to the meeting. Sometimes, you know, they start on time more efficiently. We didn't quite have to happen because we had a technical glitch, but, you know, that you're not waiting around for the last person to turn up for 10 to 15 minutes. You're actually getting started. So I think, yeah, that will be a big change as well. If more and more people do opt to work from home, it will be devastating for CBD businesses and landlords, but I think it will give people flexibility. I think it would make it easier for people to move to the regions, and instead of having a big house in Sydney, maybe just have a unit and have the big house in the country.
And has there been any conversation at government level about improving infrastructure, transport, communication, that kind of thing in the regions to encourage people to do that and to be able to do it more effectively?
I don't think those things have happened yet, but they probably should be looking at it, because it really has broken down that stigma about working from home and having people thinking that everyone has to come into the office every single day. So I think it, you know, is a really good opportunity for governments to look at how they can support people having those options.
Mm. Parties like the Labor Party have policies on a variety of things, which is their platform when they go to an election to say this is what I stand for. Have you started a review of your policies because of COVID?
Not a thorough and systematic one, but everything is sort of being looked at as issues have emerged. So usually, I mean, the Labor Party has rules about how we change our platform, and they involve us having a conference, and we can't have a conference this year because you can't have many people in the one room. And to change the rules about how you would change the platform, you need to have a conference. So it's complicated in that regard. But in terms of the things that, you know, the tinkering rather than the platform, yeah, there's certainly a lot of thought going into that, a lot of discussion about that. There's a big focus on the rebuilding efforts from both the bushfires and from COVID. So yeah, there's a lot going on about thinking how we can support the community in the way that's necessary at this point in time. And we've had an extraordinary 6 months. It's been quite unprecedented. It's been 100 years since there's been a pandemic, and those bushfires were the worst that we've ever had.
Yeah, it's been I don't want to say unprecedented because it's an overused word, but you know, we had the bushfires. We even had some floods, like some which we shouldn't ignore either. And then and now obviously the pandemic. I mean, somebody said to me the other day, I cannot wait for the 31st of December. You know, I want, you know, the 1st of January, 2021 is, I just need to sweep all this behind me.
Oh, but you know, who knows what we're in for in 2021, let's be honest. So Julia, it's been a really interesting time, obviously, for tenants and landlords. And I know you've done quite a bit of work in that space to try and get some more assistance for both sides. Can you talk us through what you have done and the opposition that you've come up against with trying to do something effective?
Yeah, so from the outset, we thought that the government's package of relying on land tax was insufficient. They were pretty much transferring the support they were providing in the commercial environment to the residential one. And even in the commercial environment, not every landlord's paying land tax. No. So they're not getting that support to pass on to their tenants. But for residential, obviously, only 16% of landlords in New South Wales are paying land tax. And the great irony is they're usually like the big landlords, big like Meriton, Stockland, people like that, or people who are sitting on a falling down old house on a very valuable bit of land that they're trying to build units on. Yeah. You know, there's the people, but generally, apart from that last example where it might be just one property, but it's, you know, on a development site, they're the people who are actually best capable to smear the losses and to offer discounts to their tenants. People who own only one property are in the situation where they're crossing their fingers and hoping their tenant doesn't lose their job, because that is often their only form of income over and above the pension.
And there's stories we heard time and time again, and I'm sure you did as well. Yeah.
Yeah, they really rely on that income, and they don't think of it as an investment portfolio. They think of it as the unit they bought, usually not that far from where they live in their house. And it's often the only additional investment they have. I mean, some of them who were in small business, I mean, that is their super. And so it's really, really difficult for them to support their tenants. And when I've spoken to local real estate agents about it, I mean, it's been a huge impact on them, because it's the majority of the work they've been doing over the last few months has been negotiating rent reductions. Yeah. And what Labor wanted to do, and what we're still hoping the government might implement, you know, now that we're in recession, is a rental hardship fund like the other states have had. And if that lever had been there, it would have been a lot easier for the agents to get landlords to come to the party. Some landlords wouldn't have ended up being out of pocket at all. Others would only be by a small amount. And also you'd be able to offer the tenants a more realistic rent reduction. I mean, they will, you know, often they're desperate and they'll accept anything. They'll be happy to take a $30 a week rent reduction. But if the property is still unaffordable for them, they would still be in a position, because of their loss of income, that something closer to $80 or $100 would be better for them. That would, you know, that would help everybody, and that would also be money going back into the economy. They wouldn't be worrying about skipping meals or, you know,
and we found ourselves,
that sort of stuff.
Exactly. And we found ourselves, unfortunately, in a really adversarial position between landlords and tenants and agents and tenants. And I don't think we needed to be. And I just wonder what kind of reflections there might be on how we could have all handled it better and more effectively in the outset. I guess that's a conference conversation, and you can't have a conference, right?
Look, I think it wasn't helped by, you know, people with extreme views at either end starting the conversation. Yeah. You know, there were threats here coming from Melbourne, but people read all this stuff on the internet now, but threats coming up from Victoria about going on a rent strike and suggesting that people should participate in a rent strike, whether or not they've lost their job or not. Yeah. And then people in Sydney saying, you know, being worried and saying this is coming, and implying that all tenants are going to try it on and don't even think about giving them a rent reduction. And, you know, some of the cases I've heard of tenants who've been really struggling, they were having problems with their landlord before. Like, there's a family I've dealt with in my office from Marylands who are paying $750 a week for a duplex in Marylands, which is a lot. They've got 2 special needs kids. They run a food truck business, so obviously that's out of action completely. They've been living there for 18 months, and they have had trouble trying to get maintenance from the day they moved in. Like, in the first week they were there, the air conditioner died.
Yeah.
The windows that they haven't been able to open the whole time they've lived there, and you know, they were given an eviction notice because they fell behind in their rent.
Yeah.
And the eviction's obviously been on hold because of the moratorium, but I'm sure that process will start up again very shortly. But I mean, that's just an
I know,
awful
and
story.
it's a really awful story, and it's frustrating as well for real estate agents when they've got, because they can't just spend the money without the landlord approving it, obviously, and some landlords just refuse to do maintenance that is absolutely essential for the tenants. It's a very, I don't know what the answer is.
But it is really tricky.
To that. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Julia, we noticed that, and this has been quite unhelpful as well, when the Prime Minister came out and said, you can't evict anyone, full stop. You know, my work here is done. And then what happened from that position is exactly what you said. People said, well, I can go on a rent strike. All they heard was, I can't be evicted. And then it slowly unfolded about what the framework was going to be, and then there was another education process that went back in. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the state taxes and how inefficient they are and the rest of it. But it's just been announced, and much discussion has taken place, but there hasn't been anything behind that. And we've found that has been a problem as well. When you say, oh, we're going to get rid of stamp duty, and that was all that people heard, then what happened in those circumstances was that we had quite a chunk of the market saying, well, I won't buy anything. I'll wait for that to happen. And then we've had the task of going back in and actually educating people and saying, look, this may happen, but if it does happen, it ain't going to happen in the next couple of weeks, or probably in the next 12 months, maybe longer. So it's very, very uncertain, but people heard there won't be, because it was on the front page of the paper. Yeah. There's not going to be any stamp duty, you know? So
I think both are very problematic. I mean, the Prime Minister came out with a clarification about the moratorium on evictions to say there's a moratorium on evictions. There's no moratorium on paying rent.
Yeah.
And but by then the damage was done to an extent. And the stamp duty conversation, I imagine your members are really picking up on that. And people won't be thinking necessarily about that it will be replaced with a broad-based land tax, and there'll be there's just no way any side of politics could get that sort of reform through without an element of grandfathering the stamp duty that's been paid in recent years. And
so
recent, I don't know what number they'd be talking, but you have to make it equitable, and usually equitable with icing and a cherry on top.
So, Julia, the Treasurer did come out and say, axe the tax, and that was interesting for all of us to deal with. But give us a bit of an idea of what actually is involved with making reform of that magnitude, because it's not just about the government saying, okay, we're going to get rid of stamp duty, is it? There's a lot more consultation and discussions that have to happen.
Look, it was one of the topics discussed in the Henry tax review a decade ago, coming out of the GFC, and some of the things proposed in the Henry tax reforms were implemented, and a lot of them got wound back almost straight away because of the very adversarial environment in Canberra. These reforms aren't going to stand up unless you have either one side of politics being incredibly brave and incredibly dominant,
Yeah.
or that you have support from both sides and you try to contain the argument to the detail. So making sure the grandfathering is appropriate, making sure nobody is sort of taxed twice while other people don't get taxed at all.
Mm-hmm.
Those things need to be really sorted out, and you need to try to bring people on board and have goodwill on all sides. But it's a really complicated process. Even if you limit your discussions just to within New South Wales, it's still going to take ages. I don't know how long it took in the ACT, but the ACT hasn't had a Conservative government for a very, very long time. They don't really have many scandals around their Labor government. They really are in a good position to be able to push through reforms, and they have a very well-educated population who actually read the news and read detail, are interested in policy detail. So they're probably a lot easier to take with you on a discussion about tax reform than the rest of Australia. So they could do it a bit faster. You'd still have people questioning how you're doing it or why you should be doing it at all. But it takes a long time to get a reform like that through and to bring people on board with it.
Julie,
everyone thinks it's a great idea, but no one's got the guts to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everybody's a bit protective of their jobs as well, right? So if everybody thinks, it's a great idea, let's make it happen, and then the general population of New South Wales go, actually, no, we didn't like that, you're gone. You've got to look for a new job, right?
Yeah.
Julie, one of the things that concerns me in this space, when we first said that there won't be any evictions and we'll have to do deals, the data that we're seeing is that it's somewhere around about 4.9% of tenants nationally that have successfully been able to demonstrate their case and had a rent reduction. So that's not to say you don't have to pay any rent. So it's only 4.9% of the tenancies, which is quite low. But the issue that concerns me is when the federal government's going to turn off JobKeeper. Yeah. And then all of a sudden the employers are going to, and that is where I think that the problems are going to start, in serious problems are going to start. So I don't know what's in their plan, but I would really hope that if they are going to turn that off, that they do it not like that, but like this, step it down, so that business can adjust. But if they turn it off just in one go, then I think it is going to be really, really disruptive and damaging to the economy.
Absolutely, and it's a real worry if they would consider doing that while some of the restrictions remained in place. And, there's some industries, and particularly the performing arts, which is full of people who probably didn't qualify for JobKeeper because they're either work as casuals or they're self-employed sole traders, and they won't be performing to massive audiences for a very, very long time. But even with hospitality, I think it would be a bit rough to remove JobKeeper from people working in that industry until you're able to have restaurants and pubs as full as they used to be, because they're still not going to have the same staffing requirements that they had before. And so people are still going to have reduced shifts if they were part-timers before, and they'd probably be still letting people go if they were permanent employees, because they just wouldn't be needed if we don't have the customer base.
Yeah. I know also from years ago, and this is not my space, so I'm not across how it's calculated now or what the numbers are, but when we look at unemployment figures now, I know some years ago, 20 years ago, when I might have had some understanding of it, that you weren't technically unemployed, husband and wife, for example. So the both of you may have had a job, and one of you lost your job, but whoever in the husband and wife relationship lost their job, they weren't counted as being unemployed. This is at least 20 years ago, and I'm wondering whether or not that is still the case, because if it is, the numbers, the figures of unemployed people that is being published may not count those individuals, and I just don't know whether or not that's the case.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I know that the number of hours that you work to qualify as having been employed is a lot lower than it was 20 and 30 years ago, certainly when we were in the last recession. Back then, I think it was 3 or 4 hours a week. Now it's 1. But to get job seeker, you certainly can't get job seeker if your spouse is employed.
There you go. Well, that's it. Yeah.
So in Marylands, which is where my office is, the number of people on job seeker doubled from March to April. It's now the 5th highest in New South Wales. And that would be excluding everybody whose partner is still working. So there's a lot of people who work in retail and hospitality there, a lot of people who work in the beauty therapy industries, people like that, who certainly if they were casuals have lost their jobs. But if their husband's still working, they're not registering for job seeker.
Actually, I didn't even realise that. That's that's difficult, isn't it? I've just got a question that's come through, and I do want to encourage anybody that is watching us now, please, if you've got questions for Julia, just type them into the chat. Julia, do you see the real estate industry as an essential service?
Well, in the way things are described at the moment, absolutely. Obviously not an essential service to the extent that hospitals and electricity generators are essential, but yes, it's certainly an essential service. I mean, people need somewhere to live and they need to buy or rent somewhere to live, so they certainly need the industry to be there. And I think it's very much valid. If, at the moment we're considering essential as anything that we can keep open in a safe and healthy way. Yeah. Which is a bit of a weird way to use the term essential, but it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, because
people
I think
won't be able to find houses. They can't just walk down the street and move into something with a private for sale sign on the front fence. No. It just doesn't work like that very well.
No, absolutely.
So
people have to move for all kinds of reasons, right?
If we start with the 3 things that a human needs, which is food, water, and shelter, then I think you can make that case. Leanne and I were given an expression, I think it was last week, from a member who I have a lot of regard for, up in Ballina, well, Byron Bay actually, and what he said to us was that the property managers right now are the doctors and nurses of real estate, and I think that's a great expression, because these people are. Our people here, the property managers, are having to work so hard to actually solve a lot of problems, and they're having to come up with answers on the spot, snapping an answer out of nowhere and binding things together to get people through this. And they're doing an incredible job. And I know that a lot of them, are going home of an evening real battered around, and we've been trying to put tools out there as much as we can, and to be honest with you, I feel deficient in this area just because we don't have these things at our disposal. But just trying to support these people through this process. They're working so hard and taking so much stress on, because it's every person. When they deal with one tenant or one landlord and they solve a problem, and they put that to side, and then their next one comes, then their next one, and it's it is, So I think that's a really good description of what's happening out there with our people.
Yeah, and that's a lot of work that tenancy managers really don't have to do very often. But in the last few months, it has been, especially in New South Wales, where there's been limited guidance from the government, and they've really encouraged everyone to negotiate amongst yourselves. You guys have been the brokers in the middle, trying to minimise the adverse impact on the landlords while making sure the tenants can actually afford their rent and not be destitute or not fall into arrears. It's been a huge impost on your industry.
Yeah, it is. It's been a real challenge. While we're talking about property management, obviously on the 23rd of March, we had changes to the Residential Tenancy Act. So that sort of happened at the same time as we had our education and training reforms, and the same time that it became very clear that COVID was a serious issue for all of us to deal with. There's been, so the residential tenancy changes took a really long time to get through. I'd love to just get a bit of an understanding as to how those things progressed through Parliament, why it took so long, and there are some parts that are quite unworkable for the property managers. That being the case, when do we get an opportunity to review, and how do we go about that? I know a lot of questions all wrapped into one there.
So these reforms went through, I think, in 2018. It was before I had the portfolio, and they did take a long time to be implemented. I know in terms of the domestic violence ones, they were actually sort of further amended last year, even though they hadn't been implemented. You know, once the framework was out there, people started to identify issues with them, and I think also because it had publicity, some people actually thought that framework was in place, but they did notice some really problematic things, such as you know, need to clarify around property damage and making sure that the victims of domestic violence weren't held responsible for property damage done by, you know, their attacker when the attacker had been removed from the property. So that was really complex, but I don't know, aside from that complexity, I don't know why it took more than 18 months to actually commence these reforms. They're very much needed. They had bipartisan support. You know, there's areas that Labor or the Greens thought that they could have gone further, but everything that was in there was supported. So it wasn't through a lack of political will, but it did take a long time to bed down.
Yeah, it did.
I think, you know, there's no time frame necessarily for review at this point, but I think, you know, if you're starting to get feedback about how these things are working.
And they're just practical, they're just forms, for example, a prescribed form that just doesn't provide enough space, for example, for the property managers to make all of the comments. So they're not major things that would really make a lot of difference.
Some of those things, if they're attached to regulations rather than the Act, are very easy to fix. They don't even need to go back to Parliament. But if you start sort of compiling them and, you know, having discussions with myself and Kevin Anderson, I think that we can certainly get those things tidied up fairly quickly.
Did you hear that, property managers out there?
For a very long time.
Julia, I was intrigued in your previous discussion, not in response to that question, you used the term tenancy manager and not property manager, and I picked up on it instantly because I think that we need to recast what a property manager does, because the property manager doesn't have a lot of experience in property. Now, I like your term about being a tenancy manager, because I think these people need to manage the relationship only between the tenant and the landlord. So I might. They
also need to manage the asset of the property, though, Tim.
Yeah,
we've had this conversation before.
Yeah, no, well, I picked up on Julia's comment, and Leanne and I differ on this, so we're having this public spat now. But I think that that's where their focus needs to be. But anyway, Leanne will come around, I'm sure.
He's trying to wear me down, Julia. It never works, though. So what's as we just wrap up our time with you, and we do so appreciate you taking the time out to do this. I can only imagine how busy you are. What's next on the agenda for you? What are you working on right now that you can share with us?
Well, some of the stuff that's been happening during COVID has taken a while to sort of come to the surface. Obviously, the tenancy stuff happened very immediately, and you know, there was discussion happening all around the country about what was happening with that. But some of the other areas that really need reform have been highlighted during this period. I have some real concerns about the level of resourcing in some of the government departments. Fair trading's one of them. But yeah, some of the other departments, they didn't hire extra staff to get through this period, even though their workload increased exponentially. And I think it's been really challenging for some of them. They just weren't in a position to ramp up and take on a lot of extra work.
I can't even imagine. I mean, I know we do have our battles with fair trading quite publicly, but I cannot imagine how they are coping, to be frank.
No.
I mean, they have got so much on their plate, and I know how often, not so much now, but certainly for the first maybe 6 weeks, we were on the phone to people in fair trading every day, and that's just one industry that they look after.
Yeah, and on top of that, they had all the price gouging issues and the supermarket shelves being empty, and people selling toilet paper at
my local supermarket. The toilet paper was it was $9, and they were these big rolls that you expect in public toilets, $9, and they're now trying to sell them for $2.99 because nobody wants them. It's crazy.
I think people bought toilet paper because people bought toilet paper, and they felt like there needed to be a rush on. Yeah.
Yeah, they're still going to be using it for the next 5 years. So it's going to be really cheap probably for the next 5 years.
Yeah, totally.
Julia, we have discussed about all of us coming into COVID and coming out of it, and we're going to be different people, different ways that we work. What do you think, as far as an Australian politician's perspective, that you're going to be? How will you be different, or maybe how will Australian politicians be different coming out of COVID? Will there be different ways that you'll represent your electorate?
Well, I suppose starting from the top, obviously COAG's gone, and the emergency cabinet has been working spectacularly well, and they've been meeting a lot more often and with a lot more flexibility. So, my former life as a public servant, I did a lot of preparation for those COAG meetings from within departments, getting things on those agendas, and it was a really slow process, but often a very valuable process for some really complex policy areas. So I hope that doesn't get completely lost. But certainly in the short term, the way we interact with our constituents is completely different. I haven't had the large-scale community events on the weekends for the last few months, and that's mean missing Easter and Ramadan and all those things involve really big community get-togethers. On this coming Monday night, I'm hosting a Zoom meeting with a neighbourhood that's all being compulsorily acquired for the West Metro to have the sort of meeting I would have normally done on site there. And I suppose, I don't know that these things will always continue on, but I think certainly in Sydney, where people don't like to go out in the cold, these things are going to work well for being able to interact with your constituents in winter, because you can still do this at night, and you certainly can't get everybody together down in the park at 6 o'clock in the evening in winter in Sydney. It's dark and
it's true.
So I think what I was hearing is that you are going to be utilising technology, as pretty much all of the others are. Just one thing, Leanne and I are going to be talking about this later this afternoon, but I was alarmed about this when we found out about it yesterday, that and this is another not a government department, a judicial body, so this is NCAT now. We had a member applied to go to NCAT for a hearing of a particular matter, and they've made an application now, and they've been given a hearing date in August. So saying, wow.
And when that's a tenant not paying rent, that's another 6 or 7 weeks worth of not paying rent on top of weeks of not paying rent. So it's just a nightmare.
It's So if I don't know what the delay is and what's causing it. I have the deepest respect for NCAT. They do an incredible job there. But I don't know what the story is with that. But that's going to be a
lack of resourcing potentially, Julia. What do you think?
Yeah, possibly. And I know in some areas that there is a real push to get additional resources. So something I found out yesterday, affects one of my constituents is that the driving tests haven't been run for the last few months, but they're about to recommence, and there's been a whole lot of additional people put on because there is a massive backlog in people waiting to do driving tests.
Yeah. And
I don't know that the government is going to be prepared to or capable of. I mean, you know, NCAT, the people who sit on the tribunal have very high level,
very specific experience.
With very specific experience, high level qualifications that take years to get. It's not a short term thing like learning how to assess people doing a driving test. But I think there's going to be a whole lot of areas which are pretty much shut down for the last few months. They're going to have a backlog for ages and ages.
There's another NCAT question that's actually just come in. I'm not sure if you're aware of it or not, but we continue to have a jurisdiction issue with NCAT. Tim, I don't know whether you want to expand on that question.
Yeah, so NCAT is, the problem with NCAT is that it is not, quote unquote, a court of record, which is, by way of some example, QCAT is. And as a consequence of that, they can't hear matters where one of the parties or both of the parties, normally the landlord, is interstate. So this is particularly the case down in something like Albury, Wodonga, which, as you can imagine, there'd be a lot of landlords in Wodonga that own property in Albury. And in those circumstances, NCAT can't hear the matter. So it ends up going to the local court, which processes are far more cumbersome and expensive than NCAT, which is set up to deal with these things. And it's somewhat frustrating from our point of view why the particular section in the QCAT legislation can't be clipped and pasted and put into this one, problem solved. And well, I've never had a good reason from coming out of government why they won't do it.
Yeah, this is an issue I've heard of before. I'm at a bit of a loss to think why that wasn't done at the same time as we've recently were in the process of with the Better Regulation Amendment Bill that's before the Parliament at the moment, addressing that anomaly where up until now landlords from interstate, didn't need to disclose their address in full. So, it creates similar but worse headaches for people.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. We're talking about here's the evil, if you will, that they're deciding that they won't invoke the QCAT section here. So there must be some evil here, but by not doing it, there's a real problems over here as well. And I'd have to say, I think that these problems, I'm fully cognizant of that, but I haven't been given anything on this side.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that bad landlords think that, if they move to Queensland, they can be the worst landlord in the world for their New South Wales tenants, so let's do that. But, some people, when an opportunity is presented, will take it.
Yeah.
So, if it makes it a lot more cumbersome for these processes, whether it be initiated by the agent or by the tenant,
Yeah, there's been some very bad outcomes for both landlords and tenants because of this. There's a litany of examples, but we just haven't had any response.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that some tenants, not many of them would pick up on it, but some might work out that this is going to be more expensive in a court matter. So, because their landlord lives in Queensland, they can be a little bit naughty.
Yeah,
probably
unfortunately,
find out by inadvertently doing that, and then finding out later, they're lucky enough to have a Queensland landlord a second time.
It just seems that it's something that could be fixed quite easily. And it hasn't been.
Yet it hasn't been.
I've got a lovely question to finish up on. Julia, if you could change one thing that the government has done with COVID-19, what would it be?
implementing a rental hardship fund.
I had a feeling you might say that.
So
Yeah.
it would make such a big difference to so many people. And okay, it wouldn't give back the hours that agents have spent negotiating, but it would make it a lot easier for people. It would make it a lot easier for landlords to be a bit more generous. And while government's done it for good reason, it's governments have created the recession, to protect all our health, and the consequences are being felt by other people. And I think that government needs to support them as much as possible through this.
Yeah, you make a good point there, because what you said, if you give that to landlords can then assist tenants. So assisting the landlord is in effect assisting the tenant, and I think that's the bit that hasn't been fully appreciated by the community.
No, but it's what it's been done in other states. I mean, no landlords are getting your $80 a week, but only passing through 60. They're getting what they're passing through, and sometimes they're passing through a bit more if the loss of income is of such a sufficient magnitude. But I think that people need more support, and we have the highest rents in Australia here in New South Wales, and yet we're giving the least financial support.
It's good observation. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, well, we're going to let you go and get on with your busy day. Thank you so much. We really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Julie. I'll echo Leanne's words, because I do know how busy you are, and your team as well. So thank you so much for coming on and giving us your insights.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
have
bye-bye.
a lovely weekend.
Bye.
Thanks, you too. Bye.